Welcome to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. Today, I'm talking about sticky situations that are likely going to start to come up, especially as COVID cases continue to rise here at the end of summer, beginning of fall 2021. This is more of an update to the COVID situation for wedding vendors, especially as this fourth wave starts to occur. I'm going to be talking in this episode about vaccine requirements, cancellations if you're not vaccinated, whether that's by the vendor or the client or yourself, potential restrictions coming into play, and more. Now, I want you to know now in this intro that this is not a pro one side or the other here. It's just a very real situation that people are facing. And it obviously implicates contracts you currently have with clients and contracts that you need to fulfill your performance on, whatever type of vendor you are at a wedding, whether that's you need to provide photography services, videography services, DJ services, and COVID continues to impact those services that you are offering and contracts that you have that you need to finalize with your clients. You have weddings coming up and events coming up this fall. So with everything that's going on in the world, I thought it would be best to jump on here, give an update to the COVID situation, answer a bunch of people's questions. This is more of a Q&A type of episode. We fielded questions for the last week or so regarding how to best handle things. And legally speaking, that is how I am going to answer these questions. So again, this is what I think you should do, and this is what you ought to do. This is your legal implications if you do X and your legal implications if you do Y. So without further ado, let's just get into it, Legal Pagers.
You're listening to the Legal Paige podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. As a reminder, before we get into this episode, I am legally obligated to give my disclaimer. So I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. All legal information I talk about on this episode is intended for the masses and a large variety of different businesses. I am only your attorney when you hire me and we sign an engagement letter for me to work specifically on your legal issues. Please feel free to seek out another attorney in your hometown if you need specific legal advice or contact me for more information. Alrighty, here's the episode, friends.
Okay, friends, thanks so much for tuning in today. As you know, I'm going to be chatting all about COVID, our favorite topic in the entire world, because apparently it just never goes away anytime quickly. And I'm going to answer all your questions on how to handle certain situations regarding state guidelines, vaccine protocols, you name it. So the very first question that I kind of am getting that's a little more all-encompassing is how can wedding service providers handle the situation that we're facing right now? I think the only way you can handle it is to be extremely well-informed about your best next steps. And then I think you also need to be very well prepared to defend your contractual position and to also defend your own business morals and values to your clients. So what do I mean by all of that? First and foremost, I think a lot of people are hearing things that are out there. Obviously, we could probably have a dispute on this, but I would say there's no dispute that COVID cases are on the rise. Hospitals are extremely packed right now again. And then a lot of that is surrounding vaccination statuses and who's in the hospital and who's not in the hospital, who is getting into the ICU and who is having to get on ventilators. Now, honestly, I definitely agree with statistics that are out there and hospitals stating across the United States that they are full. They're full at the end. ER cases, COVID cases are on the rise, and people are having severe complications from the Delta variant that has been kind of infiltrating the United States this summer as everyone was open for business and all the mask mandates started to go away and people were just living their lives this summer. But I think everyone kind of knew in the back of their mind, okay, are we really back to normal? And does that mean that we can just continue on like this forever? There were lots of people at the CDC. There were lots of people, scientists in particular, that were saying there's another wave coming because of the world opening back up, so to speak. And that's exactly what's going on. So if you didn't hear last week, Canada declared the fourth wave actually occurring and, kind of a state of emergency. They're looking into ways. Canada's a lot more strict and stringent than the United States is. But it's really important to note that because, what all countries and first world countries do is the United States looks to all of that for federal mandates. Here in the United States, things are a lot different, I would say, than other countries because we are very state specific. There's, federal powers, state powers, and a lot of COVID has relied on state mandates and state guidelines. And so it's going to be different no matter what state you're in. I want to be very clear at the get-go of this episode that, things that are happening in Texas and Florida and basically a lot of the South right now is different than things that are happening in, I would say, highly vaccinated states. And they are taking all of that into account. Of course, all political things aside, I think politics, of course, play into this and we can't discount that. So whomever is kind of the party in power in your state as well has a lot to do with what's going to occur in your state. Now, that's why I say you need to be well informed. I don't want you to just kind of brush away what's happening in the media, what's happening from the CDC, what's happening in your, state and locale governments and what they're issuing, what clients are saying, what people around you are saying. I want you to take all of that in and really start thinking and foreshadowing what could occur with your business in your particular region. Because I think a wedding photographer, for example, in Alabama will probably be doing things a little bit differently than a wedding photographer in Oregon. Oregon has been pretty strict on a lot of vaccine requirements and mask mandates, and Alabama has not. So that's going to play into how you perform your services because you're used to how your region handled the pandemic since it started last March 2020. Now, I also want you to be aware of what your contracts say. That is the next step. So be well informed with everything that's happening around you and all of the sources of truth that you like to take truth from. And then I want you to be very well prepared for what your contract states, how you're going to defend your contractual position with your clients, and who may be in cancellation territory is what I'm going to call it. So your existing contract is what's at play here. A lot of people have been asking me, and I'll get to this question here in this episode about who can ask about my vaccination status. The thing is I would probably say maybe 0.5% of people have that in their contract. I would say probably even less. A year ago, when we were all revamping our contracts because we had force majeure issues, we had cancellation issues, we had rescheduling issues, we've gotten our existing contracts to a pretty good place at this point in the wedding industry, I would say. And that's been a lot of what I've been teaching and really just trying to educate people on over the past year and a half. Now, I would say most wedding vendors do not have anything regarding vaccination statuses in their contract. If you do, power to you. I have no idea how you came up with that quickly, but if you do, then you need to go with what your existing contract says regarding that. Other people just need to go with kind of the COVID clauses that they have in their contract, whether that's an explicit COVID clause, like an acknowledgement of COVID and no rescheduling clause, or whether you do kind of have some cancellation and rescheduling policies and parameters surrounding COVID if you offer your clients a little more wiggle room. You're obviously probably going to have a beefed up force majeure clause. And I'll just go in and state this here. COVID is not like unforeseen, unpredictable, and it's probably not impossible for you to perform your services. I'm just going to caveat here, of course, if there's another shutdown, that would probably implicate force majeure, but then you still have to argue that people never really foresaw that happening, and that's probably not the case. So anyway, I'm not going to get into force majeure, but you're probably safe there, so don't worry. You probably have a beefed up force majeure clause. We've been doling them out like crazy here at TOP. We had free force majeure clauses going out for the past year and a half on certain platforms. So hopefully you know what your force majeure clause says and you're prepared in that fashion in your contract. And then I just want you to go take a peek at kind of like fee clauses, make sure your deposits and retainers, hopefully they say retainer, but if you do have deposit, just go to that section. Make sure they say non-refundable retainers. Make sure that the language that your client signed on to is what you're going to be abiding by here as this fourth wave ensues in the United States. So then when you look at your contract, you know what your contract states. Hopefully you also have what's called a cancellation of services by company clause. That means you as the vendor and you as the company have the ability to get out of the contract without it being this huge big deal and it being like a massive breach of this clause and this clause and this clause. It's just a clause that basically states, I can get out for X reason, and here's what's going to happen when I do decide to cancel for that reason. Lots of times this is when you're just not a good fit for the client anymore. There's a lot of miscommunication. You know, it's not the right call, and you thought it was, and you need to get out and you just need to like cancel that client relationship. That's where this clause would come into play. It would also come into play for personal emergency reasons, religious reasons, obviously if you get injured, obviously if someone dies, those type of things. You need to have an out and be able to back out really without additional liability and risk and fault on you. And then this clause usually states something along the lines of what happens with fees paid. Usually it's a refund, a prorated refund of some sort for the services you have already performed. I know a lot of wedding vendors, though, that just honestly refund in full because they're the ones canceling and they just don't want to rock the boat anymore. So even if they have performed a few services, like you're really letting your clients down if you have to cancel for XYZ reasons, even if it was an unintentional cancel. You just want to like be in their good graces and hopefully like not have word spread that you did that. So I always suggest like a full refund if at all possible. But if you've like performed something, like for a photographer, it would be, I would assume, an engagement session for a wedding, then you might be able to like knock that down and keep a couple $100 of that retainer for the services you perform, because you can actually show like I did, meet them. I did shoot their engagement photos. I did post-production. I sent them their edited images. Like that portion of my contract is technically complete. It gets a little wonky though if you do offer like complimentary services that are something along the lines of engagement photos, because then technically you probably should just still refund in full. Okay, now all of those things are coming into play in your head. That's where I wanted to start out this episode is, okay, what does my contract state? What are my business morals and values? Obviously, your personal morals and values are going to go into that because you are the owner of your business, I am assuming, unless you are in a partnership of some sort. Most of you, I would say, are solopreneurs. So wherever you stand in the COVID debacle, I would say, is where you need to have your feet firmly grounded. Because if you start kind of getting wiggly and you are giving your clients options to do this and this and this, and then you're giving other clients the options to do that and that and that, that looks bad for your business. I want you to be very prepared with, this is where I stand, this is what I want to do, this is what my contract says, this is what's happening in my state and region and what I'm allowed to do. If you are allowed to obviously legally perform your services, then do it. Do I need to wear a mask? Is the mask mandate coming back in my region? What is the cap on like total amount of people? I would foresee that kind of being at the center of the issue this fall. If anything, they would probably reduce capacity first, obviously, before shutting down. They're going to go backwards, right? Because we went forwards last year in 2020 with like full shutdown, and then slowly, what happened when states and regions started opening back up. And now we're going backwards. So I would say they're going to limit things not as like just crazily as they did last time, because there are people vaccinated and they do have COVID somewhat under control. Now, the big question, can people ask me my vaccination status? This is where I'm going to start answering these nuanced questions regarding who is asking you that question and what occurs if you're not willing to give it. And this is where, please, if you're kind of listening to this episode, just know I'm going to give you an answer either way, because I think you need to know your legal remedies if you choose not to get vaccinated. But if you choose to not get vaccinated, you need to be prepared for the consequences of that. So, can people ask my vaccination status? The answer is yes. It is alarming to me how many people say, like, this is a HIPAA violation. You can't ask me that. You can't ask me that question. Like, no. HIPAA is totally different. It's like privacy concerns for medical professionals that have to keep your like medical things you tell them, and, you know, all of your documentation and everything, and, you know, things that happen when you went into the hospital or a doctor's office, confidential. Like, they can't disclose it to anyone. So it's HIPAA privacy concerns. Free people, like other people in the US, can ask you your vaccination status, especially private businesses and companies. I'm not meaning to chuckle, because it's not funny. But what I think is funny is, why would so many businesses be asking for vaccination statuses if it was illegal? Like, that would be a massive issue in court and it would be all over the news. But it's not. The reason that private businesses can ask vaccination statuses and also make very stringent standards for employees working for them and coming back, you know, to employment with proof of vaccination, it is legal to do. The only thing that most private companies have to do is comply with some employment laws, and I'm going to go over those now. Other people can ask you your vaccination status as well. A person on the street could ask you your vaccination status, and they're not going to get sued, and they're not going to go to jail for doing it. That is their right to ask you, and you have the right to disclose whether you're vaccinated or not. So, hopefully that answers that question. I'm going to go a little more into depth into businesses, but clients, I think people ask that question. Can clients ask me my vaccination status? Absolutely, they can do that. Then you need to decide if you're going to, yes, I am fully vaccinated, and here's a copy of my vaccination card. I would say for the majority of people in that boat, then you probably aren't going to have the issues that people are wanting to know the answers to these questions in this episode, okay? Because you're basically squared away at that point. Like, you don't have issues with the vaccination. You don't have issues with giving them a copy of your vaccination card, which is totally okay to do as well, because you are fine with disclosing that you are vaccinated and providing proof of vaccination. That's also legal to do. With businesses asking for vaccination statuses and you saying no, then certain things will occur. Now, I want to start with kind of some legal stuff that has happened in the United States on why this is okay to do, because I'm a legal page after all, and I want to give you some like legal backing. So last week, Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett refused to block the ban by Indiana University that requires like all of their students and employees to get vaccinated against COVID-19. This is Amy Coney Barrett, who was appointed by Trump. So just be aware of that politically. Now, what does it mean that they denied this ban? Okay. And that is a big thing. So essentially, this was a petition. It was like an emergency order, which is called an injunction. An injunction means to stop. in legal terms. So they filed for an emergency injunction to say that the Indiana University vaccinations status was not okay to implement on all of the students. This was a group of students, I think about 8 students, that made this emergency request under the case in re Ryan Clausen et al. They're the petitioners. And they had essentially an emergency application for a writ of injunction is what it's called in legal terms. But I just explained it in layperson terms. And they basically moved the court to do this. They asked the court, please, XYZ. So what is actually occurring here? In order for an act upon a person or a business, in this respect, it's a university, to be legal, that act has to pass what's called strict scrutiny under constitutional law. And the court has to find that there's a compelling government interest that is narrowly tailored to protect public health. And they argued all of these reasons why it wasn't narrowly tailored, and there's they had all kinds of different arguments surrounding, I guess, honestly, percentages and statistics surrounding the COVID vaccine. I'm kind of scrolling through the brief right now as I'm talking to you. It's talking about outbreaks of vaccines and unvaccinated versus vaccinated people. Everyone deserves equal schooling, essentially. They cited Brown v. Board quite a bit, and that's the most case precedent that they had to go off of here. They were saying that there's no evidence that vaccines prevent the spread of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. And in fact, there's evidence to the contrary, so on and so forth. So you kind of get my point about what the summary of their argument was in this case. Well, what the court can do is it can either decline all around to even offer a statement on this, and it says, no, we're declining your emergency writ of injunction, or it can offer an opinion to this matter. It declined. So the Supreme Court has essentially finally gotten a case regarding vaccine requirements in front of them, and the Supreme Court was like, this is a non-issue. We're denying your writ of injunction. And that is saying something from our highest court here in the United States, because all of the courts before that too went into more depth, of course, from a federal side of things, just so you guys know, because these are constitutional issues. So constitutional issues like this do need to go up through federal court, not state courts. And they would start in a district federal court in your region, and then they would go to the circuit court, and then from there it would go to the Supreme Court. You can't just randomly write a writ to the Supreme Court. It has to go up the totem pole. And so all of those other courts had kind of more, a bigger breadth of information and offered case law and opinions on this matter surrounding, yes, this is narrowly tailored to a government interest regarding public health. And I think you're going to see that across the board. This is a big reason why I wanted to bring up this case, because while everyone can have their opinions and have, their body, their choice, their decision, whether or not to get vaccinated, what's happening and we're seeing on trend now is certain areas are requiring vaccines. Federal, public spaces might start requiring vaccines, but most importantly, private entities are requiring vaccines. And they have every right to do so based upon this particular instance of how you would analyze that act of requiring vaccinations. And constitutionally, this is how you would analyze it. So that being stated, all in all, my answer to this question is yes, people can ask you your vaccination statuses and places can require it. So first, regarding if you are vaccinated, what should you do? You can do two roads here. First, don't say anything and wait until your clients ask you, because I would assume that's what most people are doing. They're like, I'm vaccinated. If my clients need me to give proof or they have questions surrounding it, I'm all ears and I'm probably willing to offer that evidence. But other people I think right now I know because they've asked me, should I state in an email or in my contract what my vaccination status is? My answer to this is probably not, unless you really just want to kill, multiple birds with one stone here in an email. And I would say the majority of your clients are having issues with vaccination statuses and they're coming to you, then it would make sense to send an mass email to your clients, informing them that you are vaccinated and kind of explaining to them if you require further proof for any reason, whether that's, for a planner that needs to know and have proof of vaccination for all vendors, or whether that's the venue that needs to know, please just let me know and I would be happy to provide that for you. That's probably the best way to go about this. In your contract, though, I don't want you stating anything about your vaccination status. I don't think it's necessary. And also, you would be basically amending or adding an addendum to your contract that you don't really need to add at this point, when all of that can just be handled via communication, whether email or on the phone with your clients. So, what about non-vaccinated wedding vendors? Should you enact some type of cancellation clause if the clients choose a venue that requires proof of vaccination? What happens if the venue is requiring proof of vaccination and your clients don't really care, but now they're obviously contracted with that venue, and what do they do? So here's the thing. It's not an easy solution. I can't just tell you blanketly, this is what you do. You need to be aware of what is going to be implicated and how you would go about explaining to your clients that you're unvaccinated. So first and foremost, communication is key here. If you get any of these emails from your clients, or your clients call you, or your clients text you surrounding this, the first thing I would do is get on the phone with your clients. I do not think that this is a conversation that needs to be had via email to start with. Of course, I always want you to have documentation thereafter, but this is a conversation where you have to be very clear to your clients kind of what your stance is on it, and that you won't be disclosing that information to them is probably how it's going to come about. And that's pretty obvious to clients or to venues that then you're unvaccinated. So you don't have to say you're unvaccinated. You could just say you don't want to disclose that type of information. And then you have to be ready for what could occur. Here's what could occur. First and foremost, your clients could say, okay, I understand, but this is what we are requiring. This is going to be best for our situation. We're just going to go in the bubble of your clients kind of requiring proof of vaccination here, not venues, just clients. Work with your clients. Figure out if there's a solution to this. Can you, take a COVID test 72 hours prior to the event happening, or even 48 hours prior to the event happening, and then you can also wear a mask while you're performing services? Is there some type of caveat there? I think it's also really important for you to disclose if you have any kind of disability reasons or health concerns behind not getting a vaccine, and or religious reasons behind not getting a vaccine, because whether a vaccine requirement is legal also depends on who is imposing it and how they have shaped it. So who's actually bringing about this vaccine requirement, because lots of mandates, you guys, that have been rolled out already appear to be very carefully designed with these type of factors in mind. And this is how they kind of pass constitutional muster, because they have to comply with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits religious discrimination, and laws that require accommodations for people with disabilities, like the ADA, American with Disabilities Act, which could probably limit questions employers can actually ask workers claiming medical exemptions. So that's kind of in more of a venue territory, but I think it also can semi-apply to how you're going about this with clients. If the clients are trying to have a fully vaccinated wedding and this is all on them, they're kind of implementing this rule, then I would say the more you're willing to disclose, the better you are going to be at kind of coming to a solution with your clients. And all in all, it's really going to depend on what your clients want to do. If they are comfortable with you kind of offering a different solution to their, problem of being fully vaccinated and you not offering to show proof of vaccination, and they'll let you test, give an alternative option, which is testing negative for COVID prior to the wedding, wearing masks, those type of things. I would always try to communicate with them like, I am totally willing to do this. I am willing to do X. I'm willing to do Y. Let's try to make this work. That is how I would go about this conversation for all of you out there wondering. And then if there's still pushback and they're like, that's not good enough, we are requiring full proof of vaccination, then you're in contract territory. Who's canceling the contract? Essentially, I would say that there's frustration of the contract as a whole at that point. You're not really canceling on your client, right? Like in full, because you're willing to do it if they weren't requiring proof of vaccinations and you were willing to do it for this reason, and this reason, if you could, kind of fulfill the contract in other ways. And your clients aren't necessarily canceling on you because they probably still want you to be their vendor. They just are trying to take the, necessary precautions or what they feel is the best precautions to ensure that they kind of have a safe event for their guests and they don't contribute to the spread of COVID-19 during this fourth wave. So I would say there's a frustration of contract, and you're probably going to have some issues with the overall purpose of the contract and the meeting of the minds wasn't really no one really had a meeting of the minds with vaccinations at the beginning of contracting. So you had no idea that this was going to come up and be an issue. And because both parties didn't have a meeting of minds with that at the beginning of you guys having a relationship and signing the contract, and now it is an issue, these are all defenses to contract on the client side for how they could essentially cancel the contract and get a full refund. And I know you guys don't want to hear that, but I also want you to be fully aware that if you aren't willing to give proof of vaccination and there's just no solution you can come to, then some type of cancellation is probably occurring, right? What does that mean legally? You have the right to try and keep your non-refundable retainer, I would say. However, it's going to be an uphill battle in court for you to do that. I think if you ask the proper questions and you try to have other means of fulfilling the contract, yeah, you have some arguments on your side. But is all of that worth it to you? Are you willing to go to small claims court? Are you willing to get attorneys involved just to keep the retainer? And now you're just making your clients more and more unhappy. They probably wanted you to be at the event anyway, but you're not willing to kind of comply with their new terms involved in a fully vaccinated wedding. You're just going to rock the boat even more. And you have to be prepared. That's why I said at the beginning of this episode, how strong do you want to stand your ground in terms of keeping XYZ amount under your contract? My suggestion would be, in that case, you have made the decision to not get vaccinated for whatever reason. You have made the decision to not, provide proof of vaccination if your clients are wanting it. And you're essentially I would say there's a huge reason that you're technically canceling for your own personal reasons. And they're going to have that argument basically handed to them on a platter. You're going to have your arguments as well. I don't think it's worth the time and energy to go through a legal battle surrounding this. And I certainly don't think it's worth your reputation to go through that. If you really do want to keep all of this confidential, which lots of people who are unvaccinated aren't disclosing that to the world. I would say more people who are vaccinated are willing to talk about it. And so if you do kind of have some confidences that you're trying to keep, then I would probably state it's probably best to just let that client go at this point. you guys aren't like in the same place, and it's probably best that you don't serve them for their wedding. And legally speaking, I think you're just going to be spending way more money legally fighting the contract thing. And you're going to piss your clients off even more trying to keep money, that they will probably be more likely to pursue legal action against you. And so if you're prepared for all of that and you're willing to kind of give almost a full refund or a full refund, then I would do that and kind of part ways at this point and kind of cancel on your own. Send a cancellation contract, kind of come to that agreement with your clients and move forward as quickly as possible so that they can find another vendor to fill your place for their wedding. I think people are also handling this with associates of some sort. Some people have associates that are vaccinated, and so you might be able to like have a fill-in position. If that's the case, that's a good route to take. And then, of course, there's also the people who are just willing to be like, I'm not canceling. The client's essentially canceling now. They've provided all of these stipulations for me performing services. My contract essentially still stands. Like, even though you're not willing to comply with some things, you feel very, very, very strongly on that path and you're willing to fight it. And if that's the case, do that, my friend. You have every right to do so. Just be aware that courts are now looking at different factors surrounding vaccine requirements and how to comply with them. Essentially, even like nurses are subject to vaccine requirements. And if they choose not to get vaccinated, they are not employed anymore with that employer. And so then they peace out and go find someone else. But that's essentially, I'm just trying to give you kind of a metaphor of like what's actually happening in real world versus what's also happening in real world versus wedding world. The wedding world is real world, but the wedding industry versus other industries. What happens is the venue asks this, because that's kind of a different scenario where if your venue is requiring proof of vaccines, the client doesn't really care, but the venue isn't even going to let you on property without requiring to see proof of a vaccination. What do you do? This is trickier, I would say, because it's I would say most likely a private entity, a private venue owned by private owners, not public, not a federal space. That's a little different. But if it's a venue that's saying, yes, we're implementing this, and now your clients are going to be the most distraught out of anyone, I would say. So don't put all of this onus on your clients. Don't make them more stressed than they already are. They probably got this email from their venue, and now the venue is most likely one of the highest tickets that they're paying in terms of their wedding. So percentage wise, they've probably spent a pretty penny on their venue. And they probably want to have their wedding there. They've now envisioned it this entire, year. Maybe it's even a rescheduled wedding. So 2 years at this point. And now they have to tell all of their vendors, and they're hoping all of their vendors are vaccinated. But what if you aren't and you're not willing to give proof of vaccination? Then what? I think it's the same step-by-step process of communication, trying to figure out an alternative, working with the venue. And then essentially, I would say same goes. Like if your clients, they're kind of like their hands are tied and there's nothing they can do, how bad do you want to make this for your clients? Are you going to keep fees paid for services you probably haven't performed yet that other vaccinated vendors could perform at this venue? If your clients aren't willing to move the venue elsewhere. I would also state that this is probably a good scenario to offer credit to your clients, to be like, I fully understand, the venue isn't budging. I've called them on your behalf. I've tried to talk through it with them. They're not willing to offer an exception to this. I've tried offering, proof of a negative COVID test, wearing a mask the entire time. I've offered my reasons why I'm not vaccinated. And I would probably present a solution to your clients instead of going to them with the problem and making it worse for them. And I would probably state, here are some good recommendations that I have for you. pursuant to our contract, like I could perform services if it was at a different venue. And, I don't know, you could probably say like, this is my legal right to decide not to get vaccinated, which it absolutely is. It just means that you're going to be excluded from this scenario. And so you would need to tell the clients like why you're having to back out. And then you need to tell your clients what happens with fees paid if you're not willing to give a full refund. I think you could offer them a credit of some sort to utilize your services later on. That would be a good way of going about this. I don't think you can just like keep fees paid and then like ask them to go pay some other vendor. You're just going to create more confrontation and probably a higher risk for you getting into a legal situation. Now for clauses. I've had some people come to me and ask, Paige, can I add a vaccination clause or something surrounding this in my contract? I mean, you can always try to add anything to your existing contract. I don't think that that would be unfair, unreasonable to try to do that. What I do think would be difficult, extremely difficult, is to have your clients sign on to that, especially because you're kind of putting the cart before the horse there, where you're telling your clients, like, if vaccination requirements pop up and then they get all stressed out and then they're going to talk to their venues and they're like, oh my God, like, I have to sign this with my photographer. Like, what if? You're putting all that what if fear in your clients. I don't think it's necessary. I think your clients are going to get scared. I think your clients are probably not going to want to sign that kind of thing in your contract, but it is legal to have that type of clause in your contract, right? We have the freedom to contract in the United States that essentially the bride must choose a venue that doesn't require proof of vaccination. I just feel like you're putting kind of a lot of your morals, values, religious reasons behind your unvaccinated status into your contract, which really just isn't necessary all around. And I think it just creates too much information divulged in your contract. I also think it's just going to be challenging for your clients to understand like why you were doing this versus working with it on a client to client basis. Legally speaking, I think it's better to not touch your contract, to use your existing contract as is. And then when vaccination requirements, if and when they do pop up, for your different, wedding weekends, you just take them as they come. Another great question that came up is if a couple tests positive for COVID and then still goes through with their wedding, would the safe working environment clause in my contract cover me as a service provider who refuses to work in those unsafe conditions? Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, if they test positive for COVID and they're not quarantining, and they're spreading COVID like wildfire, first report that to your county health department. So figure out like who you can call and who you can tell this to, that they did test positive and they disclosed that to you. And now they're asking like everyone to still perform services and that this wedding is still going to occur. So you cannot necessarily be the enforcer, right, in this respect. I would put that in the hands of someone else, like the county health department, and they'll probably call, the police or the sheriff's department to be the actual enforcers of this, or they will show up at the wedding. I also think you have every right to cancel in that scenario and keep all fees paid, because in this case, there was something that occurred. They got COVID that impacted the ability for them to legally host the wedding and for you to be in a safe working environment when you're performing services. So if you have a safe working environment clause, this is perfect to invoke in this type of scenario to say, I, am terminating services at this point. You can't put me in an unsafe working environment. I think this is incredibly unsafe. If you're a videographer or a photographer, or even probably a wedding planner, honestly, you're going to be in close contact with tons of people. You're going to be in close contact with them in particular, the ones who tested positive. And even if you're vaccinated and even if you're wearing a mask, I would never suscept myself to be around someone who has COVID and is still going through with their wedding. So I think this is a scenario where a court would absolutely say, yes, you were well within your right to cancel as the service provider. I would just probably work with your clients quite a bit to prevent a legal situation. Because if people are moving forward with their wedding and they test positive, I would say they kind of are a no shit scared kind of people. Sorry, that's totally what I think. I've seen a lot in terms of claims coming up and people suing people in court. And I would say these people are probably more likely on the spectrum of highly litigious if they're no shit scared kind of people. And with that comes, you better be ready for shit to hit the fan if you're going to, keep fees paid, and just keep documentation of all of this. Make sure you're keeping emails, be ready to present your side in court. But I think you have a better argument here of being able to cancel the contract, keep everything they've paid you so far, and just move on and not be present at that event where COVID is running rampant. Now, what happens if a service provider is traveling to a different state that has certain requirements in place that your state doesn't? This is very similar to what happened last year and very similar to what's happened all around the world, right? We can't travel to X country unless we comply with all of these rules and regulations surrounding how we get into the country and then get back to the United States. I wanted to present this question to you all because this is probably what will occur for adventure elopement photographers and destination photographers, destination just wedding vendors in general, videographers as well, planners as well, that travel cross country to various states. And you probably are going to be impacted by differing state guidelines and rules and regulations. Just go with, of course, what you can do legally in the state you're performing services in, and is it feasible for you to get back in time, and whether it's taking a COVID test or quarantining or things that could pop up. These are all kind of what if scenarios right now, because every state in the United States does not have a way for you to not go there, I would say. Alaska got rid of its COVID test requirement, and Hawaii has either you take a negative COVID test or you present your vaccine. I would say Hawaii is the state that we all need to be aware of. For all of you destination vendors that perform services in Hawaii, you already know this. You're on the lookout. Hawaii is the first state to have gone backwards. If all of you don't know, they are limiting capacity again in Hawaii, mostly because it's islands and people travel there, and then they absolutely don't have the infrastructure for huge waves of COVID in their medical facilities. So they went backwards and said 10 people indoors, 25 people outdoors maximum. And then there is an exception for commercial events, where if it's up to 50 people or a little bit more than 50 people, you can submit a request to courts to have your event still if it is planned, and what you're going to be requiring and how you're going to hopefully combat the COVID crisis in Hawaii while you're still having your larger event. So I know that's what's happening in Hawaii right now as of middle of August 2021. And it's probably going to change because Hawaii changes all the time. So I'm really sorry for all of you who work in Hawaii. Just keep tabs on what's happening. But again, you have to also check your calendar. And if you have to quarantine, what would happen if someone did get COVID there, you were in close contact, and then you had to quarantine? How is that going to impact your weddings down the road in the future past that one event that you did have a close contact? So that's going to impact 2 weeks of your calendar. All of these things you guys need to think about as you're moving forward here in end of summer, beginning of fall 2021. I'm not trying to scare you in this episode. I just want to give you all of the information possible and what I would suggest to best go about this as wedding vendors. I think I answered some legal questions that have kind of been mulling in the industry. There's a lot of questions and comments that pop up on DMs and comments on reels that I be very, very, very careful who you take your information from and what is actually the right answer. Just be aware of all of that, especially in Facebook groups and stuff too, because these questions are going to pop up all the time. I think we just want to serve our clients as best as possible in this season, get through this year. We've already just been inundated with our busiest year yet as wedding vendors. We have so many clients to take care of. We have so much work to do. We have multiple weddings a weekend, and I just want you to be on the up and up for what could happen and things that would potentially occur into the future. So hopefully this episode answered a lot of those questions for you and you feel more informed now. What I want you to do, some action steps after this episode, go back, look at your client contracts, see what you need to fulfill and what they all say for the rest of 2021. I want you to check in with yourself. Are you vaccinated? Are you unvaccinated? What are your reasons behind being unvaccinated? How you are willing to communicate that to your clients? What information you are willing to divulge and what you aren't willing to divulge? And even vaccinated people, are you willing to, say you're vaccinated, but not give your vaccination card, proof of vaccination card? Or are you just like, yes, I'm vaccinated. Here's my proof of vaccination. And then also, just be prepared for clients to push back and be aware of where your clients are at. Is it the venue requiring this? Is it the clients requiring this? Because I think that's going to be two very different perspectives and approaches that you're going to need to take when these situations pop up. Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of where your clients are kind of coming from and tackle these situations as they come with the highest level of professional service and honestly, just kindness, if possible. I think we're all trying to be as kind and generous and over-delivering and just we're trying to be the best service providers we can, but COVID is constantly throwing a wrench in that. If you guys have any questions surrounding things that I talked about in this episode, please feel free to hit me up. You can hit me up in the Legal Page community on Facebook. That's a great place to kind of ask additional questions surrounding these topics. You can also DM me and I could try to share about them publicly on Instagram. And you can also, if you have like a very, very interesting, sticky legal situation, you can always contact support at the Legal Page. And we have kind of avenues to point you in the right direction or next best steps to work with an attorney. And we'll try to get you guys squared away as well. Thanks again for listening to this episode. I will see you guys next week, same time, same place here on the Legal Page podcast.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Page podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.